You're watching HFO-TV.
Please join me in welcoming Gwen Baldwin.
Thanks. All righty here. I'm wired, literally and figuratively. It's really great to be back in front of this group. I was speaking before you, in June. The legislature had not finished its work. In fact, it was, I think pandemonium is a pretty good word to use down there in Salem. A lot of things were up in the air, but we had a sense of where some big changes were potentially going to happen. And so today, we have the answer to those questions. There are going to be some big and small changes that you will be working with in this year. Some of them are already law. Some of them will be going into effect in July of this year. The things that are now law are largely held within what's called the Landlord-Tenant Coalition Bill. And these changes include that the requiring of renters insurance is now allowed outright. There have been some question about whether that could be allowed, and it is under certain circumstances we'll get into in a second. Screening criteria has become more limited. Non-compliance fees have been expanded. There have been some housekeeping issues that were clarified, and that tends to happen. And there are always a couple of towing issues just to round out the legislative agenda. But today I want to focus on the elements of the Coalition Bill and the Section 8 bill. Coalition, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a group that has met for more than 2 decades to hammer out landlord-tenant law issues in advance of the session so that the messiness is before, not during, the legislative session. We are one of the few larger collection of peoples who do this and do it effectively. Landlord representatives, tenant advocates, folks who are involved in code, public housing, housing authorities, all sit around the table and hash it out. And both parties down in Salem, leadership and all across the state, favor this method because it resolves problems before they get them. All 3 main housing providers do participate, including Multifamily Northwest, Oregon Rental Housing Association, and the Housing Association of Greater Portland. Those issues, you see on the screen here, are all now law. Coming soon, in July of 2014, Section 8, the exemption from source of income protected class status compliance ends. There is no longer going to be a carve-out for Section 8 as of July 1st, 2014. It's a very significant change for some folks. It'll be less of a significant change for others, but again, we will get into those details as we go along. So let's start with Coalition. Renters insurance. First thing it confirmed is that if you require renters insurance and that tenant pays renters insurance, it is not a prohibited fee. Again, there were some legal cases that had that in question. It also allows that you can require rental insurance if certain conditions are met. One, you have to disclose in writing that it's a requirement of your lease. And you have to do it before the screening charge is taken, and you have to indicate what coverage is required. It also has to be included actually in the rental agreement. It has to be, you cannot require a particular carrier. You can't say State Farm or Farmers. They get to make that choice. You can also require renters insurance of your current monthly renters, but they have 30 days to comply with this. If they don't, then you could issue a 3014. And there's also a threshold on income. Renters must have a household income over 50% AFI up to a household of 5. The insurance coverage maximum is $100,000 or the prevailing coverage required for similar rentals in the market. This was intended to get at folks who rent maybe higher-end single-family homes or have distinct markets where the typical insurance coverage is much higher than that. So you would not be limited to $100,000 in that particular market. You also can request that the renter provide, you don't have to, but you can request that they provide proof of coverage at the start of tenancy and at reasonable request to ensure compliance. So if you heard in the laundry room that they said, ha, I let that expire, you could say, I'd like to see your proof of renter's insurance. or if they were at the end of their lease time or end of their insurance renewal time. You could make a request at that time to see it. You also have to provide evidence that the housing provider, that you have liability coverage for your operation, and it must be supplied upon request. One way you can accomplish this is if you post a certificate of coverage in your office. It does not have to be, the full insurance policy. Other elements. No one can harass each other over these requirements. You can't ask daily if they have renter's insurance. They can't harass you daily. You can, but if they do not have insurance, it is considered material noncompliance of the rental agreement. There's some things you can't require. You can't require rental insurance in publicly subsidized housing. This does not include folks who are using Section 8 vouchers, but it does include if it's a subsidized housing property. You cannot require that the housing provider be named as an additional insured, and you cannot require that the renter waive subrogation, which would prohibit an insurer from attempting to seek restitution from a third party who causes damage to the insured. When making a claim, a housing provider must include only damages in excess of the security deposit and the renter's legally liable damages or costs. You have to provide a copy of that claim to the renter at the time that you submit it to their insurance company. There's some things you cannot include in the claim. You cannot include ordinary wear and tear, acts of God, or things you did. Sorry. So that's renter's insurance in a nutshell. Screening criteria. There is a national trend toward moving toward protected class status for past crimes based on the disparate impact issue. That concerns, I think, many folks within the housing industry in terms of what that means in terms of tenant safety, property staff safety. And so there was a great, very concerted effort to try to address this issue by getting at it maybe in another way. So the screening criteria changes that were passed in the coalition bill attempt to reduce that pressure toward protected class status in Oregon. Currently, as of January 1, you can no longer consider dismissed FEDs. You were never supposed to consider them anyway, but the language is clarified that if a FED has been dismissed, you can't consider that as a screening issue. FED judgments older than 5 years, and arrests without charges. Although if a charge is pending, you can consider that. The idea is you're innocent until proven guilty. If you're not proven guilty, then you shouldn't have that held against you. You can consider convictions for drug-related crimes, sex abuse crimes, a person crime or financial crime, identity theft, fraud. And this is really important. You can also consider convictions for any other crime if it adversely affects the property owner, management, other renter's property, or the health, safety, or right to peaceful enjoyment of the premises by other residents and the landlord or the landlord's agent. Basically, the theory behind this was you have to look at this person who is applying, look at what they have done, and then make a determination. And if you have a business practice and articulation of why they have done something that is problematic to the health, safety, or right to peaceful enjoyment of the premises, then you will be in stronger stand than if you just said, oh, I just had a hunch kind of thing. You can still rely on all references. That is always going to be a very, very valuable screening tool. How was this tenant at a prior tenancy? And last, the screening criteria was moved outside the discrimination section of the law where it had previously resided. And that also was an important separation from the protected class status affiliation. On to happier things. Non-compliance fees. 2 new fees were added for policy violations. So smoking in a non-smoking area and unauthorized pets. These join the current noncompliance fees of late payment of a utility or service charge owed to a housing provider, failure to clean up pet waste, failure to clean up garbage, rubbish, or other waste in common areas, parking violations, and the improper use of vehicles within the premise. Bigger, however, is the structure of noncompliance fees was changed. Again, with the idea that there is objection to this being just sort of a quick money-making venture tool, but it should be a redirect tool. So if somebody is doing something that is a policy, then they're non-compliance, then the idea is to have a stepped structure. So if they keep doing something, then the punishment, if you will, the fee, the expense, increases. So the way that it is currently law is structured is that you would have a warning for first noncompliance. You would then have a written notice and a $50 fee, the $50 fee being the current fee amount, maximum. Then the third would be written notice, $50 fee plus 5% of rent. The clock resets at a year, so if somebody got a warning and then did it again in year one for written notice and $50 fee, but it doesn't happen for 3 years, if it happens again, you start over with a warning. You don't suddenly have 50 plus 5%. You must charge the fees within 30 days. You always have the option to instigate an eviction process, but you can't do the fee and the eviction at the same time for the same non-compliant event. And you can't take the fees out of rent. There were a couple of housekeeping changes. Clarified that 12 a.m. midnight is to be the end of the last day. There's been some confusion about that. Rent means that a payment gives the right to occupy the dwelling unit and the use of the premises, such as storage or garages, and that you could charge a late fee if the entirety of rent is late. So if somebody hasn't paid for a carport or their storage, that would constitute late rent. A replacement key can be charged to the renter. You can charge credit card processing fees if the renter has the option to pay by cash or check as well, and charging the fee is allowed under the credit card agreement. Those were all things that there had been some confusion in the statutes. The loss of use damages are restricted to renter-caused cleaning or damages. Again, if somebody else causes it, you can't come back to their account. The time to return the rent to avoid waiver was made consistent at 10 days. In one section of the law it was 10, and the other it was 6. So it has been consistent now, made consistent to 10 days. The carpet, as everybody's favorite subject, carpet and carpet cleaning. The language was a little vague, and so it's been clarified to confirm that the carpet has to be cleaned after the previous tenancy or the most recent significant use of the carpet if a fee is charged. The idea that if you charge a carpet cleaning fee and you clean the carpet after the tenant leaves and you decide to do some significant renovation and the place gets dirty again, you can't have done that because the carpet hasn't actually been cleaned for the new tenant. Towing. If you use patrol towing, this is not if for any other type of towing. If you use patrol towing on your property, you have to have a prominent sign that non-authorized parking is prohibited 24 hours a day. You may still call for towing as needed, but for example, if you have a couple of spaces that you want to prohibit people parking for unless they're coming to the leasing office, and you have it saying you will be towed on these certain hours but not on these certain hours, that's no longer allowed. If you are going to have patrol towing and this is not an authorized place to be, it has to be unauthorized 24/7. So now we move to Section 8. As of July 1, 2014, the Section 8 carve-out will be gone from the source of income protected class status. What that means is that no one can be denied housing solely based on using a Section 8 voucher for rent. A housing provider may refuse to rent based on past conduct of a proposed renter consistent with state, federal, and local laws, or based on the renter's ability to pay, taking into account the value of the totality of state, local, or federal housing assistance for which the renter is approved. You do not have to discount your rent amount. And the idea behind this is that if you didn't know Section 8 voucher was a part of this mix, would you rent to this person anyway? Do they qualify? Within the bill, housing authorities are supposed to strive to facilitate landlord participation in this new Section 8 program by ensuring timely inspection of dwelling units, prompt processing of applications and payments to landlords. They're also to strive to facilitate participation by establishing leases that match the standard and customary lease length for the unit in question, providing a single source of contact for referral assistance, and establishing a mechanism for local provider feedback. The lease length has to be what you would do if renting to any other renter. You can't have different standards. It can't be month to month for Section 8 and a year lease for any other tenant that you would consider. But what this does do is say the housing authority should not be able to establish a one-size-fits-all if your business is based on a month-to-month, or if your business is based on 6-month leases. The contract should mirror what this unit typically and standardly and customarily rents for. A mitigation fund was also created in this bill for damages beyond the security deposit. The damages, property, non-payment of rent, it can also be legal fees, loss of use, must be more than $500 and are capped at $5,000. You have to have a court judgment, and that court can be small claims, circuit, or justice court. And the claim must be made within a year of final judgment. So typically the appeal window is 30 days, and if it is appealed, that's not final, so that has to be resolved. That final judgment is what you would be working with. Claim would be paid by the Oregon Housing and Community Services. The renter then is obligated to replenish the fund with a reasonable repayment plan. However, that payment plan could be waived or modified for good cause, and we're in the process of having conversations about what that good cause is. But if somebody has no other source of income, that may be a good cause for a lower repayment or no repayment. There are also issues that might be in play, for example, domestic violence considerations or other extenuating circumstances. Whether that renter has entered into and is meeting the obligations of that repayment plan, if they have not been waived, would be an acceptable screening criteria. And I think, and I will do Jill Smith a favor by saying, it is in everyone's interest, if you have a problem tenant who is a Section 8 voucher holder, to communicate that to the housing authority that you're working with. Because if they are chronic damagers of property, nobody wants them re-looped in the system. And the only way that they can lose their voucher is if the housing authority determines that damage has been done. So there you go. In addition, a rental assistance fund was created to reduce the risk of homelessness. It was not funded in the last session, but the program has been established, and that would facilitate utility payments, transportation, or other social services if someone's in crisis, and the Section 8 voucher does not cover those things. There was also the creation of a Housing Choice Advisory Committee. Housing providers, renters, and housing authorities will be a part of it. Again, it goes into effect on July 1, and it's intended to provide feedback on best practices, measurements for evaluating success of the program, and they would also be reporting the program's success or problems back to the legislature. Rules are being developed and guidelines will also be developed, but obviously questions remain. What does timely mean when they're talking about timely inspections? Conversations at this point are ranging from 3 to 5 days, but that's an important definition. Are housing authorities required to provide contracts for all standard and customary lease lengths? I believe that there's a coming agreement that is the case, but I think that that's still being sorted out. And that what happens if the terms are not met? If the timely inspection doesn't happen or the lease length is not approved? Again, I think that the argument has been among the housing providers that raises the question of whether or not you would be required to accept that voucher. But again, I think these are the things that are being sorted out. It is in everyone's interest to have this work well and be as successful as possible, not only for the folks who have not worked with Section 8 in the past, but for those in the many housing providers that do take Section 8. There are some elements in here that offer some promise of a much better program. But if I can offer you 2 buzzwords, document and consistency. If you can only remember 2 things that I have said today, those are the ones you need to remember. You will always get in trouble if you do not document and you are inconsistent. You stand a better chance of surviving any question or challenge if you document and you are consistent. But we're not done yet. There are things coming down the pike for the next full legislative session. There is a short session coming up right now, but by and large, I do not anticipate any housing issues of significance will be discussed. It's only about 5 weeks long. But in 2015, we do know that there's a conversation that will be had around a renter's right to a guest versus property exclusions. This is one that we frankly simply could not come to agreement on in the last coalition discussion, and for lots of good reasons. If somebody has done something significant enough to be excluded from a property, that's a tough thing to weigh against a renter's right to have a guest if it potentially puts another tenant, staff, or the property at significant risk. So but that conversation's not done, and we know that there are folks within the tenant advocacy community who are adamant that this is an important conversation to have, and they want to have it. Inclusionary zoning. This is probably maybe of greater interest to those who are more involved in development, but that is definitely going to be coming back in the 2015 session. The idea of if one is developing property, does there need to be a certain set aside for affordable housing in that development? I think there is some movement. There have been some conversations with a variety of housing providers as well as the home builders around looking at the deeper intent. The intent is to have people being able to live near where they work of all different types. What are the ways to get at that? Maybe it's not exclusively or even ideally the inclusionary zoning hammer, but there may be other tools. So stay tuned on that one. But let me come back. There is always a conversation to be had. And the coalition provides an opportunity to make improvements or remove barriers, make the housing business work better. Some of the issues that have been discussed, they can be small or they can be big. The ability to have maintenance staff replace water heaters without an electrician's license. The ability to add to the landlord-tenant law a tenant's responsibility not to hang things from or tamper with sprinklers. Not only can this cause severe water damage, but if you are having a housing inspection and you've got a damaged or compromised sprinkler, the fines are significant. And then last, post and mail requirements to address the equal reciprocity issues that can eliminate this option if your renter has a P.O. box and doesn't get mail delivered at the unit, or there's no on-site property management. So these are some sort of smaller tweaks, but then the question is what would make housing and the landlord-tenant law work better? Now is the time to think about those things. If you are a member of any of the major housing trade associations, Multifamily Northwest, Oregon Housing Rental Association, or Rental Housing Association of Greater Portland, communicate. you're on the ground, your on-sites are on the ground, your property management companies are on the ground. Find out what that is, because I can guarantee that other interests come to the table with a long list of things that they want. And in any compromise, you have to give and take. And if you have nothing that you want, you're in a very vulnerable position. So with that happy note, I will turn this over to the economy, which is looking up, I think.
Thanks for watching HFO-TV. To learn more about HFO, call or visit our website. See new listings, apartment news, videos, and more when you download our apps at the Android and iPhone markets.